Hi, this is Peter Compo, and you are listening to the 215th episode of the Service Design Show.
We often think of strategy as this rigid, predetermined plan, right? But what if it was more like jazz, adaptable, improvisational, and responsive to the moment? In this episode, we'll explore how to create strategies that flow and evolve, allowing us to navigate complexity with grace and agility. Hi, if you're new here, welcome to the Service Design Show, where we invite the brightest minds in our field and explore what's truly needed to design great services that resonate with people, push our businesses forward, and of course, honor our planet. Our guest today, Peter Compo, has spent over 25 years in the corporate world. But what might surprise you is that he's also a talented music composer with strong roots in science. It's this unique blend of experiences that has led Peter to develop a fresh perspective on strategy, one that challenges traditional approaches and embraces the dynamic nature of our world. He's even written a book about it called The Emergent Approach to Strategy, where he breaks down complex ideas into practical techniques. Interestingly enough, it was actually the biography of Marie Curie that sparked a turning point in his career, leading him to explore the connections between creativity, innovation, and emergence. In this episode, we'll dive into this unique approach to strategy and discover how we can all become more adaptable and innovative in our work. You'll hear what an emergent strategy actually looks like in practice. We'll explore how to transition to a more adaptable and learning organization. Peter also shares some great insights on co-creation and why it is essential for designing a successful strategy. Plus, we'll dive deep into the vital role of reflection and how to iterate your way forward. One thing that really caught my attention was Peter's emphasis on measuring the process, not just the outcomes. It's so easy to get fixated on results, but he makes a compelling case for why understanding the journey is just as important. This episode is full of those aha moments that will make you rethink your approach to strategy. Whether you are a seasoned strategist or just starting out, this conversation offers valuable insights for anyone looking to navigate complexity and achieve their goals. Ready to explore the world of emergent strategy? Let's get started. And be sure to listen all the way through because I'll be sharing some final reflections at the end. I'm your host, Mark Fontijn, and you are listening to the Service Design Show. Peter, you have a deep passion for music. Could you share with us how does that inform your perspective on emergent strategies?
It informs it really clearly. It's that people might think that music is all about free thinking and no rigor, no discipline, no rules. And it couldn't be further from the truth. That I think demonstrating the importance of rigor, of discipline in the arts really can help us think about how to be creative, how to be innovative in other fields, in business, in any organizational design, any product design.
How have you experienced that rigor and that discipline within music?
Well, I grew up in a musical family where you start to get a sense of, why do you practice? Why do you learn theory? Why do you learn fundamentals? If it's all just, whatever you want it to be, why would you need to do all those things? I also studied composition. And composition starts, and a great composition teacher starts to face you with the consequences of your choices, and that everything isn't arbitrary, and that there are rules, but you have to find your own rules, and they're deep down, not just high-level rules. And I continue to compose music today and get advice and Um, for example, I'll ask a great composer to help me with a piece, and they'll say things like, "Well, that doesn't work, does it?" Or "There's a false note here." Well, what are you talking about? How can there be a false note in music? Isn't it all just whatever you want it to be? No, it's not.
Hmm.
There's a real discipline behind writing music, and to be able to get it to end up being free and original, that's the trick. And that's the same thing we want to do in any field.
It's fascinating, and I love these crossovers. There's so much we can learn from looking beyond our beyond our scope. So somehow, Peter, you found the discipline to sit down and write a book on the emergent approach, emergent strategies. Can you walk us through sort of your journey? What inspired you to actually go through this effort and put this into writing?
It actually started with that music, but then I ended up going into hard science. My my doctorate is in chemical engineering from City University, City College in New York, and I started to see the same patterns there of creativity and innovation in pure science and in the history of science that I saw in some ways in music. And as we were talking about before we started the recording, I read Marie Curie's biography written by her daughter Eve. And it really inspired me when she talked about that Curie's great discoveries were about eliminating the wrong possibilities versus just visioning and guessing and free thinking about the right answers. And this really stuck with me in a big way. When I went to corporate America, I joined EI DuPont, the nearly 200-year-old company at the time, famous for many, many groundbreaking products, one of the great companies of the 20th century. And what I was surprised at was how they thought about creativity and innovation, and especially how that connected to the theories of strategy. And DuPont, I think, was hardly alone in these beliefs. We had all the major consultants in there, so it was really the same, I think, as everybody else. And what I didn't see in strategy, and what I didn't see in the idea of innovation, strategy for innovation, was this rigor, was this discipline around how you discover emergent properties, how you discover new things. And right from the start, I just had this idea that I was going to write about this, but I had no idea it would be a book. I was just taking notes, and I thought maybe I'd write a little here and write a little here and create a little bit of a process to be able to get my ideas. But over the years, it just grew and grew as I learned more about what people do. And when I learned more about the theory of emergence, there's a whole science of that. Eventually, I left the company after 25 years and said, I got to write this in a serious way. And it just snowballed.
I'm curious, for who did you write this book?
I wrote this book for practitioners, number one. The first half of the book is theory, the theory of emergence, the theory of strategy. I think I'm one of the few people who have defined strategy based on a theory of innovation as opposed to intuition or defined from experience. But the second part is all about how to put that into practice, how to convert the theory of innovation into things that we can do every day. Simple tools. Yeah, you have to learn how to use them. But once you do, they're relatively simple tools. So I'm trying to help practitioners. Now, there's a whole group of people that help practitioners called consultants out there in the world. I hope I can influence them too by bringing um, more definition to things like what is strategy, what is execution, how to know whether you have a strategy, what's really needed in your metrics dashboard and things like that. I hope I can influence the people who are teaching as well.
You bring two words together, emergent and strategy. We have service design, also two complicated words coming together. Could you let's start with the strategy part and then maybe also explore emergence a bit more. You mentioned that a lot of people think about strategy as something based on intuition, and I don't know, you didn't use the word gut feeling, but I'm curious, like, how does your perspective on strategy differ maybe from what is the common perspective?
Well, there's a whole bunch of things in there, but maybe we can start even with what the definition of a strategy is. Um, there is a small group of people that have been heading towards a strategy as a rule, a central rule that guides decision making and choices. It's not the choices themselves. It's not just we're going to serve these markets with these products and target these customers and use this kind of delivery system. That's a business model.
Mm-hmm.
It may or may not be what you really need to describe in your strategy, but in so many cases, it may not be. Your strategy may really be how to motivate the organization to do it, or how to get the skills to do it, or how to stop doing things that got you to that point, but that are no longer relevant. A strategy is not just a list of business model choices. It's a rule for guiding action and choices of all types. And the other part of it that's really crucial is that the rule is designed to, to get over what's in the way.
Mm.
And in my language, I call that the what's in the way is the bottleneck. And I like the term bottleneck specifically because it implies flow. It implies that in any organization, your objective is to constantly be moving forward, constantly delivering something to a customer or to a client. Or if you're in the government, you're trying to deliver something to the people. You're constantly trying to move forward with delivery. What's keeping that from being exactly what you want it to be, from growing that delivery, from being more useful to people? That's the bottleneck. And the design of the strategy is the rule that helps you bust that bottleneck, reduce it, eliminate it. Usually you can't eliminate bottlenecks, but reduce them, make them less relevant so that you increase the flow of what you're trying to achieve. There's a few people, this is kind of in the heart of what Richard Rummel talks about, the crux, what's in the way. There's a few other people who have talked this way, but I still don't think people are onto it yet. The idea of that a strategy is essentially a rule. And I think in part it's because people think, well, that's not creative. Rules aren't creative. Well, actually, it's quite the opposite. When you write a piece of music and you really want to create something new, you are adhering to some internal rules that keep you from making certain choices and demanding that you make others, for example.
Okay, so if I do a layman's summarization, a strategy helps you guide decision making to uh, minimize bottlenecks. Can we? Yeah,
Well, it's a rule that enables you to make choices that will attack the bottleneck. So let's do an example.
sure.
Say you're trying to grow in a new market, and the problem is that the organization, especially the marketing and salespeople, just for example, are stuck with the existing markets that got them there in the first place, right? And that without their goodwill, without their interest, you're not going to be able to move into these new directions. You need a strategy that busts that bottleneck. What could it be? I mean, you could fire them. right? And get new people who aren't burdened by this history, or you could involve them in the design process of how to move on to the next stage so that they feel ownership for it. You could just tell them this is the way it's going to be. I don't know. All of those ways of approaching it are ways to address what's in the way of what's going on. In another case, growing might demand a whole new capability of a workforce, maybe training, maybe, you know, having a system of moving people out of jobs over time that would enable bringing in new people. We could come up with many different examples, but the point is that whatever your strategy is, it has to attack what's keeping you back, what's keeping you from your aspiration.
Got it. So let's put strategy on the sideline for a second, and then zoom in on the emergent aspect, which isn't a word that is common in the business context. So I'm not a huge fan of definitions, but could you help us unpack emergence?
Yeah, and it's a really important term to unpack. Let's go back to when Henry Mintzberg in the 90s came out with the rise and fall of strategic planning, where he pointed out that this illusion that people are planning the future is really not helping. And this listing of goals and choices and plans and so forth in great granularity, right, isn't really resulting in making the changes people want. And that actually what happens isn't related to what they thought. Well, this connects to the ideas of adaptation and emergence, that you cannot predict the future very well. You can try to shape it. And the theory of emergence says that to shape the future, to get global, and I use the word global technically, not global in the world, but to get the high level outcomes you want, the results you want, you can only work at low levels. Interactions between people, interactions between people and machines, and outsiders from the organization. Um, and what he said was, well, there's two kinds of strategy, really. Maybe he had four, I don't even remember now. But the two most important is there's deliberate strategy and there's emergent strategy. And that some businesses need to be deliberate because they know what the future is going to be. And some need to be emergent where you don't plan the future. And this is where I took exception. I love the fact that he told everybody, let's stop this game, this illusion that we're planning the future. But all strategy is both deliberate and emergent. It's deliberate in the sense that you have to make some decisions. You have to have a theory of the case. But it's emergent in that all you can do is take a bunch of actions at the local level, working between people and machines, between people and assets, and you've got to hope that it emerges as something that you want in the future. And the difference between deliberate and emergence is not that one, you plan the future, and the other is you just do whatever you want and see what happens. It's the degree of constraint you put on that process. So the leaders of an organization can say, look, we're really not sure what's the right way to go here. We're going to give people a lot of autonomy to run experiments. That's one possible strategy. That's a beautiful rule. We are not going to tell, strategy rules are best when they tell you what not to do. We are not going to give people very specific direction on how to achieve these objectives. We're going to let people experiment. And we're going to come back every 3 months and we're going to talk about what we're learning. That's a very viable strategy versus, look, we don't have time to run experiments anymore. We feel very confident of what we're doing. And if we screw around anymore here, competitors are going to get ahead of us. Here's the rules we're going to play by. And we'll come back in a year and see how we're doing. But no more experimenting. Here's what we have to do. That's also a very valid strategy. They're both deliberate. They're both emergent in the sense, in both cases, you have no idea what's actually going to happen. You can only do the things you feel you have to do. The difference between them is degree of constraint. That's all.
And degree of constraint in which sense? You're giving less constraints to
Great
the
question.
local system. Yeah.
You're giving more constraint. You're constraining what people do in the hey, we're not running experiments anymore now. For this next year, we know what we're going to do. These are the rules and policies we're going to stand by. That's highly constrained versus the example of a strategy where you say, we're not sure how to get the answer yet, so we're going to let you experiment. And we'll put some parameters on those experiments. Here's the spaces we're going to play. Here's the assets you're allowed to use. Here's the money you've got. But beyond that, you're not constrained. So it's this constraint on action, of which all strategy is. Strategy is a constraint on what you can do.
And what you can't do.
And what you can and cannot do. Best, if described, as what you cannot do. Leaving freedom for people to do whatever they think is right within those guidelines. Richard Rummel had a great way to say it. It's you establish guide rails or guardrails, but don't specify within those guardrails what to do. Let the people in their local situation determine what's the right thing to do.
When you share this and the example that you give, let the people in the local situation sort of define what they do. When I was preparing our conversation, I was thinking trust must be a key element in this approach. What is your perspective on trust?
First of all, it's really a great thing to talk about. Trust is a capability of an organization. It's a habit, it's a capability of an organization that has to be developed, and that it's a cultural thing that needs a strategy. That you need a strategy to develop trust. You need to demonstrate it. And I think it's a very important concept when designing strategy. A strategy with less constraint does require more trust, that the intent is kept, right? Even though there's freedom. All kinds of ideas are running in my head that you raised this issue. I just had an interesting experience with an organization where the leader kept saying, I'm developing trust. And I was saying, well, if somebody has to tell you that they're developing trust, what's going on, you know? Trust is not something you say. Trust is not something you impose. It's something you have to learn and develop as the culture of your organization. And what makes it particularly relevant to strategy is that adhering to the strategy is the tough thing. And you have to trust that people will take to heart the effort to do that versus do whatever feels good for them in their local situation.
And it feels like there is a huge amount of distrust currently in the organizations that we've built, not just from us, the customers, but also internally.
Maybe. I would say I'm not qualified to judge that. It's interesting, maybe in government right now, here in the States, there are groups of people that are holding up distrust as more and more of an issue. I think I hear a little bit about this from the European countries. Um, it's trust is a very tricky thing, right? Because it works on many different levels and it has many components. But I don't know if it's particularly a corporate issue.
Hmm.
That I'm
Hmm.
not
Yeah.
that I'm not sure of.
If we making assumptions here as well for the sake of simplicity, but what I see in most organizations is a culture of control, predictability. How do you how do we then um, invite and tempt people who are sort of have a different mindset, different approach, different attitude towards how different worldview towards how business should be run, um, and not sort of believing in in individual freedom. I know that sounds a bit too grandiose, but like let's try to control everything. Let's try to predict. Let's try to plan. Um, and then you're inviting them to embrace uncertainty and flexibility. How do we bridge that gap? Yeah.
You're really leading this to another important dimension of the concept of emergence. Another confusion people have. Remember, the first one we talked about was that emergence is the opposite of deliberate. No, it's always deliberate. It's degree of constraint. Um, Another confusion about the concept of emergence is that it means bottoms up versus top down, and that leaders don't matter anymore. And I think there couldn't be anything further from the truth. Emergent does not mean bottoms up. It means that from an organizational point of view, it means ideas can come from anywhere, not just top down, not just bottom up. They can come top down, bottom up, sideways, from outside, from inside. It doesn't matter. What matters is the discipline of capturing those ideas in a way that builds the strategy framework of the organization, a learning process, so that it gets better and better over time. So I want to just put that point out. But then to get to your issue around how do you build this system where every voice can have meaning and where people feel like they're part of the design process so that they are willing to trust others and so that they're willing to feel as though it's not just the big bosses collecting all the money for themselves and telling everybody what to do, right? Now you're talking about really changing the culture of an organization. And I think it relates very much to what we were saying about you don't just have trust. You don't just tell people, oh, your voice is in this. I'm getting everybody's voice into it. You have to do it, you have to show it. And uh, a leader's job, in some ways, is to create that capability, create the capability that decision making can be moved further away from him or her down into the organization where people are interfacing with the outside world, with suppliers, with customers, with everyone. That's almost the best emergent leader's job, that they can push that down. But it takes a process, it takes a strategy, it takes a systematic approach, like what I'm trying to present in the emergent approach to strategy. It's something you have to build. You can't just say it. And you can't tell people, oh, I'm getting your voice into the process. No, you have to show it. And I don't think it's something you change in a year. I don't think it's something you change by bringing in a consultant and they do it for you with a 55-page PowerPoint deck. It's something you got to internalize and live and develop over time.
That's a quite steep bar, but um, I'm connected to this. So let's say we have this ambition of pushing decision making down to the people who are interacting on a daily basis with customers, with the actual job that needs to be done. Um, when I'm a leader slash manager, and every 3 or 6 months, I have to report on specific metrics that I'm responsible for. Um, how do what would you say to me to get out of my zone where I want to control this process, because sort of my ass is on the line in 6 months if the numbers don't go up, right?
Yeah, well, you're entering a whole nother aspect of innovation, right? How do you know that you're moving in the direction you want to go? Uh, how do you how do you get the organization to be part of that process, using measurement and metrics, which obviously are crucial, but what's the way to do it? Um, my argument is that we are too focused on measuring outcomes alone, and that we have to measure outcomes along with measure adherence to the strategy and the rest of the strategy framework and the policies that have been agreed. It's very hard to judge a strategy. It's very hard to judge a theory by outcome alone until you're sure that people actually did it. You know, you're writing a piece of music, you can say, well, um, I listened to this teacher, or I listened to my own rules of what I was going to do differently in this piece. Maybe I restrict myself to a certain kind of harmony, or I'm not going to write it on the computer this time. You know, we've got all this applications now. You can actually put the notes right into the computer and it plays it right back for you. It's wonderful for certain of us. No, I'm going to put it on the piano first. I'm going to play it, you know? These are strategies or tactics, right, for how to compose a piece. What if the piece doesn't come out the way you like? Not successful. Does it mean that the strategy was wrong? You have to ask, did I really do it? Did I follow it? Did I really get it on the piano first before I put it on paper? Did I really stick with the harmony rule that I thought I was going to stick with? And here it's kind of easy because one person fighting it out with themselves. But what if a big organization? You know, we said we would do this. Did everybody really do it? Did they know what it meant to do it? And I think that metrics have to be half, are we doing what we said we would do? And half, are we getting the outcomes we think we want? And I embody this in what I call a 4-station dashboard, where two of the stations are, did we adhere, and is the strategy still valid? Measures of that. And then the others are outcomes, progress outcomes, and bottom line outcomes. But this is a great art in itself, right? On what's the right way to measure. I, I think that if leaders were more focused on measuring adherence, they would be less focused on scaring the hell out of people about making their numbers good each quarter and gaming the system to make
Mm.
their numbers. Because then metrics would be a learning process for everybody involved, including the leadership, versus it being a punitive, we're going to bust these people until they get it, until they work hard enough, until they're smart enough. I think there's got to be a balance there.
I'm sure you've encountered people who say, um, I don't care about the process as long as we get the results.
Yes, absolutely. What would leadership and strategy be? Just set goals, and then if you don't get them, now what?
Work harder.
Well, wait a minute.
Work
Now that's a
faster. Yeah.
strategy. Wait a minute. But now it's a strategy.
But that
Now it's
seems to be the only strategy at the moment. Work harder, faster, right?
yeah, but okay. All right. So then we would describe it. I don't care what the process is. All right. Yeah. There's no process. You just work harder.
Or I didn't care about the process,
Yeah. I don't
right?
care about the process. Well, whatever. Well, okay. Tell me, is that story to say I don't care how you do it?
Mm-hmm.
Just get results, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Well, then why do we need a leader?
That's a valid question. Yeah.
Well, I mean, we
Yeah.
could just,
Yeah.
instead of
Yeah.
paying
Yeah.
CEOs 500 times more what the average worker gets, why would we need such a person? Why couldn't we save that and hire a part-time COO and CFO and have them give a quarterly report and fill out their 10K and tell the board what's going on each quarter? I don't know why we would need leaders.
If we agree that measuring process has merit and value, what are some good examples of metrics? You mentioned, are we adhering to the things that we agree to? How can we quantify that? Can we quantify that?
Well, you're bringing in another great question around how does a metric have to be pure numbers versus things like an audit. Okay, let's go to an example. So say the habit of an organization is that the marketing and sales people kind of get whatever they want because anybody who argues with them is labeled non-customer focused and therefore should be put in the dungeon or punished, right? Because everybody knows that it's all about customers. Um, well, what if there isn't sufficient profitability in such an organization? And somebody says, um, well, yeah, it's all about customers, but we also have to ask the question, how much money are we willing to give these products? How much money are we willing to put into serving these customers? There's got to be some limits. And obviously, we're not making enough money here. And maybe we got to control our costs and our capex and what we do. And you put in a new segmentation system that talks about which products, operations, and product development and R&D should be limited to. Okay, and what packaging and delivery systems are allowed for given customer segments. Um, can a customer ask for a special? Can a customer ask for something not on the list? All these kinds of rules, that tactical policy rules that would be part of that strategy to bring back the balance between what we give to customers and what we can afford to pay to do that. Um, what if you went and did an audit and you went to the factory people and said, are you getting calls from salespeople that say, hey, I know we agreed not to do this, but you know, our customers are what matter and they pay our bills. And I really need this special cut on this product, or else we're going to lose so and so. Can you audit and find out if that's happening? Can you audit and find out that the R&D guys are saying, "Look, I know we agreed to do this, and that we were gonna focus on this product line. We were gonna focus on these features of new products, but I know that we're gonna need this in 5 years, and I got to keep it going." Can't you audit whether or not that's really happening or not, and put that in a category of metrics, of dashboard that is adherence to what we agreed to do? Now we got two choices. If we find out that people aren't adhering, we can dig in and say, why not? Are the rules wrong? Are we thinking wrong about this? That is, and this is the reason why you changed it on the fly and you didn't obey it? Or is it that you guys are still living in the old world and you're going to just keep doing what you were doing before because you think you're smart? And we need to change that. Or to the factory guy, did you feel you had to listen to that salesperson because you would be crucified as a non-customer focused person if you didn't give them that center cut or you didn't give them that special package or that special expedited delivery system? It becomes a learning process. It becomes learning about what we should do in the future and how we should improve the organization.
When we were preparing our conversation, you already mentioned that by adopting this emergent attitude, this emergent mindset, you become a learning organization. And I think a lot of organizations will say that they are a learning organization, but in practice, um, everybody is too busy running towards the next horizon, and not taking the time to pause, reflect, and sort of iterate. Um, do you see that as well?
I see that very much, and it relates to what we were just talking about. One aspect of an emergent approach to strategy is that, and I'm not the only one to say this, obviously, it is not a once a year, we do a retreat for 3 days and hammer out our strategy. Um, we know that the vast majority of those processes really aren't strategy. They're really budgeting processes and forecasting and deciding what we're going to commit to Wall Street or whatever stock market is or whatever your owners or board is. Uh, it's not a strategy process at all in general. But what we're describing as a learning process where the dashboard is part of that process. This is an ongoing habit of the organization. This is an ongoing habit of saying, we said we would do this, but is it really moving us in the direction we thought it would? Can people adhere to it? Can we do it? Is this even realistic? We didn't talk about it, but another part of the dashboard is if you really created a strategy, you have to consider multiple futures. You have to consider scenarios of the environment you're going to be in when you impose this strategy. Um, the fourth part of the dashboard is asking regularly, are these scenarios what we thought they would be?
Mm.
Are we in the environment we thought we would be in? So I want to answer your question by distinguishing between a strategy event that everybody agrees is wrong. The question is what replaces it? It's this ongoing learning. It's this ongoing challenge to what we believe and how we can embed that and code that into the organization, involving people throughout the organization in that process. This can be done.
I'm hearing different, while you're sharing this, I'm hearing different stories and voices from all the people I've spoken to in the past come through me. So I'll try to channel two arguments that I've heard often. One is, it sounds to me that this requires like a very humble and a curious mindset, saying we don't know what the future will bring. This is contradicting to what's going on in a lot of organizations where you are expected to be the expert who tells everybody else what needs to be done. Let me take a pause there. So this is a big struggle. This is a big challenge.
Hey, there are leaders who are geniuses. There are leaders who really see it and who really understand what has to be done. I think we know that that's true. And their strategy can be, for example, I'm going to get people who get it and who will take direction. and who will do what I want them to do. All right. That is a very well considered strategy. I know the answer, and my strategy is to get people who will help me do that and not argue with me, not waste my time. Okay. Um, of course, they may not know the answer. They may not end up being right, but you're probably not going to change somebody like that. So why bother? Um, Especially if it's their money and that it's their business. Okay, but now let's look at the average situation or a more average situation. The average business leader in a large corporation where there's many business leaders, and you've got products that are old and products that are new, and you got a lot of competitors and so forth and so on. Um, is it ever that simple?
Mhm.
Uh, and uh, is it ever, you know, a matter of just getting people to do what you say to do? I don't think so.
The strategy here is, do we trust that if we bring smart people, competent people together, and we tell them, we don't know what we need to do, but we trust that you will figure this out, um, and focus on that the results will sooner or later be the results that we're looking for? Which is a almost radically different approach than most organizations take these days.
Kind of connects to what we were talking before. Until an organization has capability to discover and work together and be a learning organization, so it may require the leader to be top down. You can't just all of a sudden go into a um, a situation and say, "Well, I don't like the top-down approach. We don't like this. Everybody's now a leader. Everybody's part of the game." No, it doesn't work like that. And I said before, I probably said the wrong words. You don't change culture in a year. That was a wrong statement. You don't transform something in a year. And the word transform is thrown around in the consulting strategy complex so dramatically now, it has no meaning. Um, but I think you can make a cultural change in short time, in a month, in 3 months, but it's a ramp up over time to get where you might want to go. It might take several years to really change the culture of an organization because it takes practice and it takes habits and it takes failure to correct. Um, but this idea of moving from the leader tells everybody what to do to the leader, it establishes disciplines and methods that enable people throughout the organization with different views and different perspectives to be part of that learning process. This is something that takes skill and time and techniques to do. And you don't just impose it. And now all of a sudden you're an organization where everybody's involved in the strategy. It has to be learned. It reminds me a little bit, many years, 20 years ago, or even a little more now, if you worked in a major corporation, Jack Welch was God, right? Whatever Jack Welch said, that was great. And I remember reading stories, and we experienced this in DuPont as well. Um, I remember reading stories of people who would take a Jack Welch approach on, say, personnel and how to create an ongoing refreshment of the organization and how to build capability over time. And they said they put in Jack Welch's methods and things got worse. Well, it's because these are not recipes that you can do like baking a cake. You have to learn them. You have to internalize what these things mean and develop them over time. There's no magic to doing these things and to
It's hard
changing.
work. Yeah.
It's hard work. There's no magic to going from a top-down organization to a distributed knowledge organization to one where the right people are getting the voice into the picture and are part of that story.
I'm sure your book has a lot of examples of the how you mentioned that you want to make it practical. Let's assume that now that we've gotten so far into our conversation, we're excited about this idea. We wanna do the hard work. What would be one or two things that you'd recommend us to start with?
I always recommend that in the absence of some other idea about where it would be best to start, there's a very simple technique that I call the aspiration-bottleneck strategy triad, which comes from the theory that, and we talked about it early in the talk, the theory of emergence, that essentially what you can actually do, the choices and actions you can do day to day, aren't really what matter. All that really matters is getting the results you want, achieving your aspirations, or doing better than your aspirations. And so you have this conflict. What matters is what you can't do. What you can do ultimately doesn't matter. You have to bridge those. And strategy is the way you bridge them. So if you write down on a single piece of paper, and this is a very, very important point, on a single piece of paper, a single PowerPoint slide, I don't care what the vehicle you're using, a Miro board, whatever it is, write down what you believe to be your aspiration. Now, I'm not the only one who says this. Roger Martin says, start with a winning aspiration. Well, I don't know if it's winning. Let's not use words like winning. Let's use no jargon. What is our aspiration? What do we want to do? We want to change the culture of this organization. Well, why? And in what way are you wanting to change it? I want to get more people on the front lines involved in the strategy process. Okay, great. Now start. What's in the way? What's the bottleneck to doing that? And start listing possibilities. They don't have the skill to do it. They're frightened to speak up in front of the boss because in the past, if they ever said anything that conflicted with what the boss said, they got knocked down. Let's look at other bottlenecks. Huge one. People on the front lines don't have time to drop everything and go work on a 3-week or a 6-week strategy program because they're busy running the thing. People at the factories, people running suppliers, sales people, the whole works, customer service people, right? They can't just drop everything and go to a 3-week retreat. It's another big bottleneck. How about they don't care? They just want to be told what to do. They're happy. They want to come work at 9 to 5 and they want to go home. And and it's on somebody else to make it right. And they'll follow exactly to the letter what they're told to do. And if the result isn't good, say levy, you know? Okay, you start talking about bottlenecks. And of course, if you can get more people with different perspectives in to reveal what's in the way of changing this culture, you start to get some richness here. No, I don't think that's really what they're feeling. I think it's really this experience. And you start to modify it. And then at some point, you're driven immediately because of the age-old statement that a problem well defined, well articulated is half solved. You immediately start to say to yourself, how can we address some of these bottlenecks? And that becomes your strategy column. So you've got, imagine just 3 columns: aspiration. You could even have a few choices of aspiration because you don't know yet. Your bottleneck in the middle, and then your strategies on the left. And behind this, if you Look at any of my materials, you see a figure that looks like a V on its side with the closed side on the right-hand side. You could put it anywhere you want. I just happen to go from right to left. Use the closed end of the V is on the right-hand side, and the big end of the open end of the V is on the left. And that's to represent that for any aspiration, there's countless possible choices and actions you have to take to have that aspiration met in an emergent way. So on your strategy, you're saying, how can we bring all those choices together and actions coherently to bust the bottleneck? I think this simple exercise is amazing how it will engage people and get the juices flowing, in a sense, on imagining strategy. And one thing that's helpful is that the difference between another difference between emergent and traditional strategy approaches is the discipline of a traditional strategy approach, and no one wants it to be this way, but kind of in the extreme, is to follow the steps. To follow the step. First, we define an aspiration. Then we do an environmental scan, and then we do a SWOT, and then we do plans, and then we do strategy, and in an order. The discipline in an emergence approach is based on design principles, not order of events. So there's design principles and criteria for whether you've got the right bottleneck in chapter 13 and 14, excuse me. And there's principles for what a real strategy might look like. And you can have these principles in the back of everybody's mind when working this. But this is a terrific place to start. This simple aspiration bottleneck strategy triad, and you can really engage people in the discussion. So that's number one.
And you had another one, right?
I would say two others. One is kind of traditional, and that is write down everything everyone believes about what's going on and what people are trying to achieve and what the problems are in some kind of format, not just long lists on a piece of paper, but characterize them in some way. For instance, what are problems that we can't change or we don't think we can change versus things we think we might be able to change? Write down what you think the true aspiration, the goal is, but then write alternatives to it or alternative goals. Distinguish between things that are imposed on the organization, external constraints, and constraints that we're imposing on ourselves. And then make a comment. Do we think we can negotiate away from some of these external constraints? Is it an option? Can we talk about it? And kind of go through it's kind of a disciplined brainstorming process where you categorize all the features of what you're trying to do, your endeavor, and see if some form comes out of them and some stories come out of them. I think this can be a useful process. It also, and I recommend this as one way to get going in chapter, in the first part of this work. It's also a very good way to make sure that everybody feels their voice has been heard, because you're not really criticizing too much at this point. But you aren't just writing everything down that everybody says. You're constantly saying, what do you mean by that? Why do you think that's true? And capturing that. So I would say that's a second way to get started. The third way is a strategy matrix. And a strategy matrix is, like many things, been around for a long time. The idea that in the columns, the column headings, and it's usually the column headings in mine, which I call the strategy alternative matrix, SAM for short, and I feel very guilty for creating another TLA, another three-letter acronym. We have enough of them in the world, but I couldn't help it. It's the only one that I use. A matrix is the concept of putting alternatives as column headings. And then in the row headings that forms the matrix, you put down how you would evaluate these alternatives, how you would decide whether one's better than the other. And then the matrix itself in the middle is how do you assess these alternatives versus these criteria. Sometimes right to a SAM, right to a matrix can be a way to get things going in a very good way, especially when people are already debating alternatives to what's being done currently. And one technique is always put your current approach in the first column as a reference. And I think not only do you start to get people going by looking at alternatives right off the bat, but especially these, what I call fitness criteria, the row headings. How will you judge whether these alternatives are good or bad? And when you get people from different walks of life, when you get different people from the organization, the service people, the factory people, the marketing people, the finance people, they all have a different view about what makes a great alternative, from their unique perspective. And capturing those early and debating them can really be a way to get the process started. So I think 3 ways you can get going, and all 3 of them can then lead you to digging in deeper. And eventually, I think you've got to get to a matrix. But you can start with the matrix as a way to get going, or this kind of categorization of all the facets that you can think of about the program, about the endeavor, or in a more targeted way, the triad of aspiration bottleneck strategy. And I'll just say, we can talk a little bit more about those individual things, but the magic to finding strategy is to discover the bottleneck. And it goes back to a problem well defined is half solved. The magic of finding strategy does not come from the aspiration directly. You can't do it. And what ends up happening when you try to just think about the aspiration and not the bottleneck is you start writing down lists of sub goals. You just break the aspiration up into a million parts, and it's not a strategy. It's a laundry list. And if there was any one message, perhaps, about how to find strategy that I could convey, it's the bottleneck. Focus on the bottleneck. And that little triad is a way to bring it into focus right off the bat, right from the beginning.
I'm hoping, and I'm quite sure that this will resonate a lot with the audience, because service design professionals are often so focused and passionate about finding the right questions and trying to figure out not how to do things better, but what the right things to do are. So we are super curious. This is coming back to the start of our conversation. This is music to our ears. So I hope people will be sharing this episode beyond our community to people who maybe have a more traditional perspective on strategy. Peter, sort of heading towards the wrap-up and closing section of our conversation, we've talked about a lot of abstract concepts, organizations, culture, trust. I'm very curious if the process of writing this book has influenced how you apply an emergent strategy on your personal life.
It's a great question, and I have colleagues and people who are, who work with me, who ask that question, and they say, "Where's your Sam? Where's your major?" And we actually do it, and we talk about it, and um, we talked about what are the. I'm in a very unusual situation. I don't think very many people write a book of this kind of comprehensive nature of theory and practice and a detailed practice. Um, are working out of their home, their music studio, right? And not part of a big academic department or not part of a large consultancy. I'm kind of a odd bird in this sense, and that brings bottlenecks, right? Um, and we talked about the fact that also what I say is subtle, in many cases, subtle differences from traditional strategy, theory, and practice. And in some cases, abstract and tough to get across in a sound bite. And I also refuse to use words like transformation and breakthrough. And I teach against using these words because I feel they give the illusion of progress and understanding when there is not necessarily any, and that the real world is jargon free. So we looked at many alternatives for how I can move this thing forward. Um, and all the traditional things, training classes, blah, 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 more marketing, more advertising, so forth and so on. But where we landed on is first, I need to create a better how to, a better guidebook that brings some of the things we talked about today, like how to get started and being in different situations. We decided that that would be the next thing that's needed. And then webinars and training sessions and Q&A sessions and video clips could be built off of that. And that's how it worked. And it was not an easy discussion because people, they got to get inside of my head about what I'm able and willing to do and kind of the life I lead. And there's other challenges. I also have other endeavors. I'm writing scientific papers on adaptation in biology. I'm writing music, and I need to continue these things because I'm going to be able to show people the commonality in all these fields. So I have some real constraints on me. And we went through those and decided on this course of action, and we used the SAM to do that.
I'm going to use that as well. Sounds very, very helpful. And again, it shouldn't, I don't think anybody listening will find it complex. They might find it challenging, but that's a different thing.
You have to learn it. You have to learn it. But once you learn it, it is simple. If you learn some of the basic techniques, and you can only learn by doing, along with looking at some of the basic principles, you can only learn by doing, just like anything. I think you'll find it's very simple. Hey, look, we keep it on one page, not a big PowerPoint deck. One page, more talk, more debate, more thinking, less words, less prose, no bullet point lists, no lists of a million great things to do. I think it can be very simple, but you have to learn it.
I'm going back to school and practice this. Peter, I want to close off our conversation with two things. One, if people are interested to learn more about you and your work, what's the place you direct them to?
Two places right now. You can go to emergenceapproach.com. And there I have Q&As, FAQs. I've got added examples. I've got chapter supplements, and also the beginnings of this guidebook that I'm talking about, which there is a online version that we're going to be turning into a paper, a physical book with more information and added. But you can start with those task sets right there that do go through the principles and the methodology. And it carries through something I started in the main book, The Emergence Approach to Strategy, building a bike shop. and launching a bike shop, and I carry that example through. The other place is LinkedIn, where I post frequently and I discuss basic principles of what the difference between traditional and emergent type thinking is. And I think you can get a pretty good view of some of them. I also have many podcasts shown there. And I was just interviewed over 9 interviews with in the Aidan McCullough's the Innovation Show. So there's a lot of online material that you can get here too. And then, of course, be looking for this new book coming out that will complement the main book, The Emergent Approach to Strategy, Adaptive Design and Execution.
Thank you. All the links. Yeah, you wanted to add something?
Well, if you want to hear some music, you could go to Peter Compo on YouTube, Peter Compo Music, and you'll see you can hear some of my music. You might see my father, who was a jazz violinist in New York City. He's got a few albums from the old days. You might see that as well. But if you go to Peter Compo Music on YouTube, you can hear my music.
Nice. Then the final thing that I want to wrap up this part of our conversation with, and that links to what we talked about, finding the right questions to ask is half of the work, if not more. What's the question that you'd like us to marinate on, think about after this conversation?
I would say ask, is my strategy a bullet point list of sub goals and initiatives and various choices? And if that would be not so bad, but of plans, sub goals, metrics, initiatives, strategic goals. Is it a big, long list? And is it really teaching anybody anything? Is it really changing our view? Are we really learning anything from it? If you can say yes, keep going. But if you can't, consider looking at something that is a much different paradigm and starting very simple, like we talked about. A simple triad, a simple matrix, 1 page, and asking, are we really digging into what's in the way here? Are we really digging into what we want to do? Or are we writing down a bunch of stuff that really doesn't influence what we do, and our success is coming from good people figuring it out as they go? If you're happy with that, great. If not, give a look to another process. Give a look to another way of doing it. And there's real theory behind this approach that I'm teaching. It's not arbitrary. It's not just based on my experience. It comes from a deeper understanding of how creativity really occurs and how innovation really occurs. And so, give it a look.
Thank you, Peter. It was a pleasure to explore this topic and to, I wouldn't say scratch the surface because it doesn't do justice to what we've just discussed, but starting to explore the tip of the iceberg. And I got excited. I am excited. I'm going to test my own strategy for our Circle community to see if it stands the test that you've just put up. And I hope, and I'm sure many who listened will do that as well. So thank you again for coming on and sharing your experience.
Thanks for having me, Mark. I enjoyed this.
You know, it's fascinating how many elements of an emergent strategy overlap with what we are already doing as a service design community. We're already big advocates of putting the right systems in place and designing the right conditions for certain outcomes to emerge. The approach and tools that Peter describes can become another great asset in our toolbox. A huge thanks to Peter for sharing his insights with us today. And I don't know about you, but I'm feeling inspired to embrace an even more emergent approach in my own work. If you've enjoyed today's conversation, you can do me one big favor. Click the like button on this video and maybe leave a short comment if you haven't done so already. Not to feed the algorithm, but rather to let me know whether we are on the right track by addressing topics like this. Finally, before we part ways, please take a moment to reflect and celebrate that by joining us today, you've directed your attention towards learning and growing as a professional. So from everyone who you are going to impact through your work, thank you for taking the time and making the commitment. My name is Mark Fontijn and I look forward to having you with us again for a brand new conversation on the Service Design Show. Take care and see you soon.